Friend, welcome back to the show. Today, I'm sitting down with my friend, Melissa Vela-Williamson. She's an
Hi.
accomplished PR strategist, speaker, and now a two-time author. Her book, Smart Talk, Public Relations Essentials All Pros Should Know, has helped professionals bridge the gap between theory and real-world PR. And now she's back with Latinas in Public Relations, an anthology highlighting the journeys of Latinas professionals shaping the industry. We'll dive into her author journey, the challenges of writing and self-promotion, and her expert PR insights. Let's get started. Melissa, thanks for joining me.
Hi, Hussein. Thank you so much. I was so excited. I jumped right into your intro.
Oh, you're good. I love it because here's the thing. When I get to meet people like you, especially because we've met long before, and when you first started on your first book, there's sort of like an energy, an exciting energy to get into your first book, writing it, but then there's the journey, right, which we got to hang out in for a while. And when you reached back out, we stayed in touch via LinkedIn. I love watching your work. So I'm super grateful that you reached back out to, hop into podcast and talk about your new book. So yeah, thank you for joining me. Seriously, I'm excited to tell. My energy's heightened. But I kind of want to start with this. I kind of want to go back in time just a little bit. You mentioned that back in college, you said, I had a debate with my creative writing professor about my identity. Am I a Latina poet or am I a poet who happens to be Latina? For me, the difference between those two descriptions wasn't really about identity. It was about the type of work people could expect from my writing. I love it. Can you elaborate? Can you go there a little bit more with me? Can you tell me about what that experience was like for you?
Yeah, I love that you bring that up. I was just having this conversation with a reporter earlier today, actually an editor of that old college magazine. And I was sharing that experience because she asked me, well, what led you to write Latinas in Public Relations? And I want to be so caring and careful with how I answer that. Because truly, it's taken me, as you mentioned, many years to understand where I fit as a writer, where I fit as a public relations professional, where I fit as a human being, right? And human beings are so wired to categorize and make sense of things. And I give a lot of grace around some of the conversations we have around identity and race and ethnicity and culture, because I want to look at it and people just want to understand how to connect with you. And they want to feel an understanding of where they belong. So that first grappling I had with, well, wait a minute, I'm writing and publishing a lot of poetry, but then I'm seeing that's about more like, I forget the proper term, but it's more like nonfiction, right? Like inspired by real life poetry about things that, I had pain around or joy around, something that made me feel something. And it made my readers feel something. But often it would be what my profession would consider as general or mainstream, right? It wasn't specifically culturally based. The ones that were, right, were interesting to some people, and the ones that weren't were interesting to other people. And so I just didn't want it to be limited in my writing, but I did see some opportunities to be in this group or, speak on this platform if I was a Latina poet, for example. But what I was just questioning was like, well, so if I went into that space, do I have to present work that is about culture and my culture? Or can I just be Latina and that is my in? And I'll tell you, Hussein, that has been a big question for me. And now I'm seeing many, 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 many people, throughout my career. It's the same in public relations. Am I a Latina who works in public relations and practices public relations, or am I a Latina practitioner? And I'll tell you, my whole career, I've wanted to be resilient and I've wanted to be agile, and I did not want to be boxed in anywhere. So I've been very strategic how long I would work on one campaign or with one client, or even when I worked in diversity, equity, and inclusion as a department proper, there was a certain amount of time where I realized I need to move back towards communications or public relations, so that I don't get boxed in this area because it's more aligned with human resources, which is just a whole different industry, right?
Mm.
But, it really depended on who I was working with and what their experiences were like. Based out of San Antonio, Texas, it's a Hispanic majority city. So we're kind of the majority and mainstream here. But even still within our community, I would notice that some people would say, great, I'll hire you if, right, you match these categories, if it's a Latino or cultural. So I've kind of had to learn to, play a certain card and pull it back and show this asset and pull it back and make this a main identity marker and pull it back, even the way I dress, because it expresses something, whether I wanted to or not. So, even my first book, Smart Talk, I was very careful with the imagery. I was careful with the fonts. I was careful with the messaging around it. I did fit in a chapter about cultural strategy and public relations, but I wanted to mainstream that concept as part of practice, which is important to all people. So, I tuck it in. It wasn't the first presenting look. And I didn't have any colors or anything that showed Latina or Latino or Hispanic or any of that, because I didn't want people to only pick it up if they were from that background or if they wanted to learn about that background. So it's been a big part of my career on the personal side, but also for others on the professional side too.
Yeah. Beautiful. Yeah, I think there's an interesting sort of tension when you come from a different background. You have a different sort of, when you live in the US and you're from a different place in the world, there's a weird line and tension there. And I tell people all the time, like, I'm Mike when I go to the coffee shop, because I don't want people freaking out when they yell my name, Hussein, out in the middle of the coffee shop, which I promise you, I've had the strangest looks. And, there's a weird sort of identity sort of rediscovery and revamping, especially when you put yourself out into the world and how you want your message to be perceived, not just you to be perceived. And it's very interesting because this is PR, this is your world, and perception it has a lot to do with how we choose our words, how we choose our colors, how we choose, all of these things. And, I want to dig deep into that. But speaking of your first book, what inspired you to write that? Smart Talk was really interesting because I remember when I met you and you were telling me about your career and all this work, but you talked about there was a defining moment that made you say, I need to write this book. What was that for you?
Yeah, I mean, it was, I've just heard this phrase not too long ago, divine download, that seems to be taken off in popularity, but it was literally something like that, right? It was 2020. It was probably in like April-ish, late April-ish. And so imagine that space about 5 years ago, and everything's pretty shut down. And what I was monitoring a lot of the news to see, what do I tell my clients? What do I tell my children? I had a 5th grader who went on spring break and never got to go back to school. So there was not a lot of emotional closure for her there in that transition that we're all used to, right? And then I had a kindergartner son. It was really hard. Who I was trying to teach how to use Zoom, as well as I learned how to Zoom and get all the equipment we needed at home while everyone else tried to, right? My clients were looking to me for guidance and counseling, and so was my family. That's what I'm known for. And my goodness, I needed some help too. So we got to a point where the kids were so desperate to see other kids. They said, Mom, can we go to church? Can we go to church and just go to the kids club? And at that point I said, we're going to have to take a strategic risk. I was just basing this on patterns, right? I don't know that school's going to open back up. Once you shut down a system that large, it's really hard to turn it back on. And things were not getting better at that point in time. So my husband and I decided to take a strategic risk and go to church. And the kids wore masks and I wore a mask. And the church we go to has got a very, very large space, auditorium that we go in. And I knew that I was very critical to a lot of the nonprofits and organizations I serve as their advisors. and to the kids and my husband. So I don't want to get sick. So I said, I'll sit in this lobby area with a little sofa. I'll stream this sermon, right? And I'll just do some prayer before that and kind of ask for some help and mojo and inspiration. Like, what are the right words? Because even our words mattered so much at that time, How do we message what to do, how to do it in such an influential way that people believe and will follow? Even when we were trying to build this plane as we were flying it together. So I was there in the little lobby. I prayed for inspiration and energy and health and protection and just knowing the way. And I started hearing, it's like the creative muse started coming, right? And I hadn't really felt that muse in a long time. And again, a lot of my work comes from, pain or it's projects, right? And projects I do during the day, but like something creative, inspirational just started coming through. I started hearing lines. I figured, well, that sounds smart. Let me just write this down in case I use it in a press material or something about COVID. And no, what I was getting was literally ended up being like the table of contents of the Smart Talk book.
Mm.
And it was an how-to type guide, a leave behind that when I looked at what was on my notes on my iPhone, I was like, this is a friggin' book. Like, why would I write a book? Why would I write a book right now? Why would a Latina who's not exactly in Latino PR, like, again, there's not a space and accepted place for this. Like, why are you putting this on my heart? But that was the inspiration, is that I felt this calling. I saw the words. They sounded like good chapters. I wish I'd had a book like that because I'd learned PR on the ground after college, all the hard way. And I thought, well, if this matters for me, it'll keep coming back up. And it just kept coming back up. And I don't even remember how I ran into the publisher for that and the boot camp that I went to with you all. But it just, things kept feeling right. It was the scariest professional journey of my life to date. But I felt such a calling that if I ignored it, I was just more anxious about ignoring it. And I thought, well, at least if I write down this book, it'll help me mentor all the people I don't have time, necessarily one-on-one to meet, or people who are too afraid to ask for advice, or, it will help me scale the efforts in community relations I try to do here. And it will be a wonderful legacy leave behind for my kids in case they ever want to work in public relations, just like you, right? I mean, having a profession and like around tech, and then you get an authorship, and now you're like, yeah, let's talk about PR and marketing because you have to do it. You do this work. PR helps everybody, and I think it can help the communities we live in and we want to serve. So that's what inspired that first journey and book, and things kept clicking into place. And I actually wrote that manuscript from that boot camp on in 13 weeks.
Yeah, I remember you were one of our fastest writers. Like, it was so incredible. Yeah, you zoomed right through it. And so tell me about, and I want to talk about the second book for sure, but I want to know, how has that first book, how has it helped you? How has it served you? Because, there's a lot of people in all kinds of different professions who are seeking to write a book, or, share their expertise, or maybe have this divine sort of, intervention, if you call it download, whatever it is.
Yeah.
That's beautiful. And I think there is something spiritual about that. When people have that urge, as you did, and then you went with it and you wrote the book, you came down to the boot camp, whatever, you got the services, you got the help that you needed. How are you now, and have been using your book to, amplify your work, perhaps grow your business, grow your services? What has that been like for you?
Yeah, it's been, a growth journey. It's been a learning journey. I'm so glad I've done it because I've been able to share my story and how I accomplished it on top of mothering and everyday work and client work and, being a business owner. And, I tell people it's not pretty, but it's doable. And if you care about something, you'll find yourself wanting to work on it, outside of the box of, the business hours, right? So let's make no mistake. The easiest part was writing it because I could just flow and creatively I did a lot of it on talk to text on Google Docs. So that was a great tip the publisher gave us, because I'd walk the dog and be like, blah, 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 blah. And then I would go back and clean it up and polish it up and refine it. But it was much more easier to draft and conversational in that way. So I followed that concept with a lot of other things I've written since then, especially my part in book 2. And
That's
so I
awesome.
always say, like, don't edit yourself while you're writing, but also in life too. We stop ourselves so much. That was my inspiration for book 2, because that kept bothering me for a few years too, that I kept seeing Latinas hold themselves back from opportunities rather than, a systemic glass ceiling that I'm not saying that does not exist, but also there are times when I say in book 2 in Latinas in PR, like, Latinas need to stop driving with their foot on the brake. Like, we're looking for permission, and can we? And a lot of that is because of pressures we grow up in, we experience in the workplace, we experience amongst each other. And, I really want to talk about that. So, the journey, to go back to Smart Talk, that was published in October 2022. So I guess it'll be 3 years old in later this year. And it has been very organic growth, little by little, the value of that experience, what it changed in me. Because at the beginning, I was like, an author, like, that sounds like such a big title and word. And now I'm like an author, right? Period.
Yeah.
And that's something I was able to help my contributing authors start grappling with early on. It is our job to represent and make the tables and be in the spaces and places we need to be. And the author is the carrot that lets us do that, right? It's a key to different doors. So it's been great, but I honestly, in terms of, revenue, because people want to know, well, what's that return on investment like? And as you know, it depends on what your goals are. Right. For me, one, was it the legacy gift and leave behind and guide I wanted to have for my family in case something happened? Yes. Right.
Beautiful.
Has it helped me scale advising, mentoring, and supporting others, particularly from diverse backgrounds, to understand the field, do it for their small business, enter it as, graduating students, advance themselves in their practice? I would say yes. It's being picked up and taught in a couple classrooms to kind of fill that gap between textbook and practice. Like,
love that.
What's better than that? Are there huge numbers of book sales? No. I'm not Ryan Holiday. I haven't found that mainstream topic just yet. Although I'm percolating on that. But something that people are like, oh, yes, I want to learn about happiness, or I need something to control this uncontrollable life, stoicism. Right. That's not my segment of authorship yet. So the numbers in terms of that, of sales, like, if you're not putting money in that Amazon marketplace coin and ads, like, there'll be one here, 2 there, maybe there'll be a couple here, but I never know who that one reader is and what their influence might be and how I might change their life. So I think of it that way. But on the flip side, on the monetary coin, is that I have seen return on investment and growth there, right? I know what I paid to work with a publisher to publish that book. And I would say that hybrid publishing is fantastic. I think it's a way to make sure you put out a wonderful product and you can control most aspects of it in a way that makes sense for your brand or your industry. So I would love that. And I know what I spent there. And my business, my public relations boutique firm, MVW Communications, like, has grown exponentially since that publication. It's like over 54%.
Amazing.
Right. And revenue, the types of clients I attract, I think the trust I continue to earn through that journey. And as they see me out and about, they know that, hey, I think she really is committed to this work. I think she does care. And of course, as they hear different personal stories, like, that helps us connect as people. So I think it's been fantastic in those ways, but you have to continue to tell the story of your book, because I do understand, and you're a great guide on, like, your book should be marketing you and promoting you. And that's absolutely true. But if people don't know it exists and we forget all the time, then it can't help you at all. So you have to continue to invest in it for sure.
Wow. So well said. You're so right. It's a, the funny thing is that how much a book attracts opportunities to you in all kinds of different ways is really just heavily relying on how much you want to get it out there, and getting it out there in unique ways, right? It's not the old myth of like this book needs to sell thousands of copies. It's just not the door. Like there's so many other ways to use a book. Also, the one thing, and I don't know if you remember this, the one thing that really distinguishes this work, there's a difference between being an author and being a writer. Writers can be authors, but authors don't have to be writers, right? In that you can use a book or the thing that you've published in a way to attract opportunities. Yeah. Same thing with writers, right? Like they're writing this thing, but those people are dead. They went to school for the craft. That's what they do. They write for a living. They edit for a living. But you don't have to be that in order to write a book. And that's something that I feel like I have to like remind people of. And because of that, we don't have to have the same goals as writers. Writers will probably mostly depend on writing more books and selling more books, to where authors will probably depend on that book to bring them back, speaking, consulting, all the different opportunity services that they can offer. And that's sort of endless today, right? You can use it in so many different ways. I've stepped into like ice cream shops, like local ice cream shops. It would be so cool if the owner wrote a book about this place just for the local community to know the story. I bet you people would come in here and buy that book, right? Just because it's sitting there, because it's so fun. Yeah. And I think about that all the time. And I'm like, you don't have to be Ryan Holiday to write a book. You certainly don't have to, especially because you have these other goals of like legacy and how to use a book in a way that is interesting to you. And that's what matters here. Success is defined by you, not how others or some random list or whatever. And then guess what? When you write your book, you're going to become a better writer. Then you're going to write another book like you did recently. And so I want to talk about that. Yeah. What was the difference between, of course, writing your first one and then gathering 14 other amazing Latina PR people and getting them to come on and, basically now guiding them to writing that book? What was that experience like?
Yeah, maybe a little bit like Moses trying to part the sea and go this way. No, really, trust me. Come this way. It'll be fine.
Yeah, it'll be fine. It'll work out.
Yeah, it's much different when you build your own table of authors and imagine context, right? It's everything. The authors, they became authors through this experience. That is very much like a metamorphosis. I keep a little butterfly on my table, and I actually bought that during my Smart Talk journey because I was like, I'm like a caterpillar. I'm being squeezed.
I love that.
But I will turn into a butterfly through this. I will come out the other side better, stronger. And absolutely true. Doesn't mean it's not painful. So I think that was my contributing author's journey too. But let me tell you the origin story for Latinas in public relations. Yay.
There it is. Beautiful.
And again, every aspect really touched by what I thought would be empowering and elevating for my community. Like even her hair was saying is like, I need it to be wavy because
it needs to be wavy.
Short, straight bob.
Let's keep it real.
I was like, why is she in a black suit? We don't run around in black suits. Maybe magenta. We'll talk about it. Yeah. But very thoughtfully done. And I think if you work in PR, you should be a more thoughtful, intentional person because of the work we do. So the anthology journey, like the origin story for that was I was getting coaching from a public relations thought leader and author named Jeannie Dietrich during that first year of promotion around Smart Talk. Why? Because it was very uncomfortable for me. The support network that you need when you're doing self-promotion as a woman from the Hispanic community is not naturally built up. And that was something I was, I'd experienced waves of that in my life, but it was becoming very clear to me on my authorship journey. In a lot of people of color communities, we are brought up in a collectivist culture meaning we're thinking of our group, our family. It's all of us. It's we before me, right? Which is very helpful to build strong relationships if you're in very healthy dynamics and in healthy families and groups, right? If you're not, it can put some pressures on you. And what you need growing up as a child may be very different what you need in your career. And the groups and the support you need is different too. That seems to be a very enlightening story for me to tell people. And I learned that during my Smart Talk journey. Like a lot of students' eyes were like, oh my gosh, really? Like my mom can't help me here? Well, sometimes they can't unless they've walked that walk before, right? So I didn't know anyone like me who had been an author, be it my background or my profession or whatnot, except for Jeannie. And she's got a lot of like confidence and chutzpah and like, you know what? And she's smart. And I'm like, she's smart. And I hired her to coach me. And I said, I just want to consult with you to say, am I leveraging this book in the way I should? Am I pushing myself as much as I should as an author? Because this is very uncomfortable. And I'm getting some weird vibes back from people, right? That like, oh, you know, it's the Melissa show and you're da-da-da-da, it's all about you. And I'm like, I mean, it kind of is at this moment. It's my book reception, right? Or whatever. You just get these pieces of feedback that you're not sure how to process. And I want to prepare people for that. Because when you write a solo book, it's a solo journey. Mm-hmm. And so that I felt like I was on the top of the mountain and you know, it was a little high up there. And I just wanted to make sure you've climbed this mountain before and you're using it for good. Tell me, you know, reassure me in some ways. And so she was very helpful. But as we were talking, I think my passion for trying to change people's mindset, particularly from my background, was enlightening her that, hey, I might need some additional ideas and support. And so she mentioned, you know, you remind me a lot of Priscilla Huaso. Have you heard of her? I said, no, I haven't. She said, she wrote a book, Latinas in HR. You should talk to her.
That's so cool.
Oh, HR? Who wants to read about HR? Gross. Like, you know, sorry. But okay. And I thought, oh gosh, what is this? Because you know, when you hear that little, like it's that calling, you're like, what's this? I don't need another project but I'll talk with her, right? And you're advising me, I'm going to be a good coachee and do that. And Priscilla was fantastic. And she told me about her anthology. She's on volume 2 or 3 of her series, right?
Wow.
And she has now made that book. It's become her movement. It's a nonprofit organization now.
Wow.
Together Latinas who work in human resources across the country. And I thought, that's incredible. Okay. But then I went, oh no, right? Because, here's another. Is it a divine download or am I just stressing myself out? It's always hard to figure that out sometimes. But as I talked with her, it really was getting me a little wound up that, you know, if there's a Latinas in HR, and when I looked at the publisher, Fig Factor Media, they focus in and have a lot of series, anthology series, Latinas in Aviation, where it started, Latinas in Corporate, Latinas in Architecture, Latinas in this and that. And I said, man, I really love that idea of representation in these different industries where our numbers are dismally low in proportion to our population here. And the why had always been a question for me. Like, why is this, you know, that more Latinas are getting college educated, but they only go this far? And then I had personal lived experiences where I could kind of put together a theory. But same thing I was noticing in public relations. Why are some of the most brilliant and bilingual, they could do work in English and Spanish, they're getting double the work, but they're not getting double the salary. And I can't find as many as I should to actually work with as independent agency owners or business owners. Like, what's that about? And so that kept bothering me. I knew about the series. I talked to the publishers and the owner, Jackie Ruiz, is just, I thought I was ambitious and excitable, but if I'm tea, she's coffee. Like she like a marketer out of Chicago, and she flies, you know, a sports airplane because she just, you know, wanted to learn how to. And I was like, yeah. And so I've been really trying to embrace why not, and embrace that with others too. So all that to say, you know, this idea of what is holding us back had been, percolating in me for a while. I didn't know how to articulate it. I didn't know where to put that message once I found it, because I'm in PR. It has to be strategic. Can't just go on my blog or on a Facebook post, right? And I wanted to be very careful and thoughtful. So one day I'm, checking out LinkedIn or whatnot, and I see that research came out about Latinas in public relations. And I should have remembered, because I was actually part of, some of that and helping find the focus group members and whatnot, and had lent some insights to that as well. When the results came out and I read it, the big, finding the researchers put forward was Latinas in public relations go through crucible moments and then are stronger because of it. And I mean, The Crucible was like a book I read when, I don't know, I was in high school or something. But if you don't remember, it's like a crucible is when you go through something that's so hard, it's like almost going to squeeze you and to death. And I'm like, why do we have to go through that? Why is that the norm? And is that what I am feeling is the issue? And it is, what I read there and different, research that I've done, and I stayed in the introduction of the book, and I've been talking about in my lived experiences, all boil down to Latinas are the fastest female group population in the US by numbers. We're like growing and going everywhere. We have a lot of influence, and we're often the decision makers in our families, healthcare, education, everything that really matters to humanity. But we don't always have that same kind of power or feel we have that power. Sometimes, quite honestly, in marriages, sometimes in the workplace, in the workforce. And I was like, what is it? There's different Spanish words that mean like you're being spoiled or extra. It's like necia and chiflada, and and there's all these phrases. I kept asking Latinas I had in high regard, like, what is the word I'm looking for that describes why we feel like we can't be too much, Kind of a woman issue, but particularly Latina, I was seeing that just, oh yeah, not me. Oh no, somewhere else, someone else. And there's a lot of phrases in English and Spanish for it, but nothing really hit it until I ran into this term called Marianismo, which is kind of the polar opposite of machismo. Have you ever heard of machismo?
I've heard the term, but not sure what it means.
Yeah. Macho man, right? Like there's an old song, macho man.
Yeah. Okay.
The trying to make others feel more powerless, particularly like women, other people, and it's not a positive expression of masculinity, right? It's the more toxic expression of masculinity.
Gotcha.
Yeah, and so Marianismo is this term that some academics or whatever put together, which it's not used a lot in our vernacular. Let me just say that most women don't know what I'm talking about when I say it, but I introduce in the book and say this is the term that they have put that said basically, we are kind of brought up to be martyrs and to serve our men and uphold our boys. And not always, there's phrases in Spanish about like you're prettier when you're quiet, right? Well, do you think that does well in the American workplace for leadership roles? No, right? But there is a pressure for women to kind of, mother in the American workplaces. So if there's unfair dynamics going on, and you want to add a nuance that Latinas run into, is that there's a pressure around language usage that other cultures may not run into in the US, where at some times I've been pressured to be English dominant, and that's how my parents raised me because of that pressure and discrimination they ran into, right? And then by the time I was in college, it was, why don't you speak Spanish? That's a business imperative. Plus, it's super sexy to be Latina now. And I'm like, okay, just because a Selena movie comes out doesn't mean like, whatever. And then look what's happening in 2025, right? Right. English is our only language now. Okay. So depending on how these wins have come in and out, there's been, this experience of pride and shame around language and whether to adopt it or not. And I think that's a unique pressure that that we face. So you add some of the gender pressures and then the language pressures. It's not a great recipe to advance in leadership in a profession in which you have to own the mic, in which you have to come off as an authority and be confident and kind of work despite some odds sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a journey. I think, the idea of, like I said earlier, and that you had alluded to earlier as well, is that, growing up in an environment where there are so many layered dynamics that you have to grow through and try to come out on the other side as a butterfly. It's hard. The challenges are hard. Let's just put it that way. Right. And, I grew up Arab American, I was a refugee. I came here. So in a way, like, and I sense that too. Like, I saw it with my sisters. I saw it with my mother. There's a lot of similarities, not surprisingly, because I know the Middle Eastern world, had its hands in Spain for a long time, and then that moved over to, right. There's a lot of similarities in women perspective and all those kinds of things, and motherhood and all that, intertwined with Middle Eastern culture as well. And so, I mean, again, I don't see it from your perspective clearly, but I understand in that, it's a challenge. And for me, like today, it's Ramadan. I'm not fasting today, but it's Ramadan. And, just like how the culture has adopted intermittent fasting and how now it's adopting, non-alcoholic beverages. And it's like, those are things I grew up with. And I had so much shame. And like, I had to like, hey man, I don't drink. I don't do this. And it was so like hard because so many people are like, well, why? Like, what's that about? And today it's like, it's like the conversation is completely churned. But you're right. There's this level of shame and then this level of like acceptance and then level of shame and acceptance. And so, it's a really interesting road that people of color from all different types of backgrounds, especially Latinos, especially in the US, have really had to ride a very interesting road, like very, very interesting. And it's hard no matter what world you're in, but I would assume clearly it's even harder when you're in PR, when you have to present, yourself, your customer, your client, all these different elements. You have to tell stories in a different way. And like you said, to own the mic, to own the story, to lean in and to help people get there, man, you got to be that. You got to embody that message, which is what I love about your work. You really embodied your message in such different layers. And now that you brought in all these other women to help really, in a way, tackle the issue at hand and really understand to unravel the knot, if you will. And so what was that like? What was it like working with a multitude of others, working in the PR, experiencing similar things in their own right? But what was that like for you?
Yeah, well, it was interesting. I mean, it was just a growth journey all the way around. One is, if you've ever worked with PR people, our work's super dynamic. You never know when something's going to happen. There's a crisis or the event you have to do, there's travel involved. So getting them all together in one lane and moving forward was a challenge, and used a lot of tools to make it all happen, right? Sometimes we could do something live and it was asynchronous and just whatever. So luckily all the pandemic learnings, helped this journey. But I'll tell you, I communicated with over 100 Latinas practicing in communications or PR to get to the 14 who committed to this. And that validated what I was wanting to write about and thinking was a problem for our ladies, right? And for our practitioners, that for us, we know how to promote others. We're used to elevating others, but for us to make, more money and have higher positions so that we can help our communities and our families, we have to do that self-work too. And self-promotion. And there was also research I put in the book about women, struggling with self-promotion because we're not always celebrated for doing so. And so, intersecting all these findings was starting to give me a picture of what the challenge was. So actually walking through this experience helped me in some ways add some solutions. And I have at least, 14 other foot soldiers who are now saying, you know what, I can do it. One of the authors was so shy and so unsure of their story. I probably talked with her like 5 times before she committed.
Wow.
And one, that was a question of like, can I invest in something like this? Because if you do hybrid publishing, you self-fund, right? So pulling together resources, it was more accessible of a cost than a solo book, but it still had a cost. And, if you work in PR, you're used to earning a lot of publication space, at least back in the
Right.
day. So that was a new, but investing in ourselves, like that was really hard for women.
Yeah.
And I kept thinking, gosh, I wonder if this would be as hard for men. I wonder if this would be as hard for women in other groups. Time would tell, right, if I tried that in other spaces. But it was a challenge. And then the other one was self-doubt about their story, and a core value of all humans is that we want to belong and we want to feel like we fit. And I love the idea that this book helped them see that you belong here. You can be an author. Your story matters. And I think some of the feedback they're already getting by sharing it virtually and in person, like it's really like touching their hearts, So the author who was so shy and unsure before, boy, I can, when she has an opportunity to tell her story, like she's going for it. And I tell her, like, the people that you will touch and the lives you will change, you'll never know someone, some of them, right?
All right.
But what a great leave behind.
Yeah.
What a great leave behind.
Beautiful. It's a lot of work. I commend you for it. So many authors struggle with self-promotion. How can they authentically promote their work without feeling salesy?
Salesy. I think it has to do with embracing the many disciplines under the public relations and marketing sun, which means like it's not just going to the media and throwing them a press release and press materials and pitching them hard. You've got to do kind of the community work, right? I'm on this podcast today, full disclosure, behind the curtain, is because I've seen you and I've seen your growth as an entrepreneur in this space. And I said, hey, if you're ever interested in another perspective or story, I'd love to help. But if you didn't know me and I hadn't kept up with you and supported what you were doing, right, you may not have been that open to this idea.
Receptive. Right.
Yeah. So cold calling and pitching and bothering people in that way is not helpful. No one's done as good of work on the PR side for the books and telling these kind of stories beyond myself. I've had external support, one from my agency when I did Smart Talk, right? They supported me with some pitching. I may have landed one interview from that. But when I send a message or when people see me talking or offering kudos or thanks or ideas on LinkedIn and Facebook, sharing opportunities, that is a natural, non-salesy way for people to find you and see you and start connecting with you. And then there might be an ask for them after you help, or then they may ask you, right? But those are some very organic ways. Going out in your community, giving away your books, doing talks, going to book fairs, supporting other authors' journey, that cross promotion across channels, it's powerful, right? You have social trust in some spaces that I don't. I may have some that help you. And so being of service and service-minded helps in this work too. And of course, you can try, some of the digital advertising, very accessible on like Facebook or LinkedIn, but there's nothing like people connecting with you as a person. And then they might be interested in what you have to say via your words in a book.
I love that so much. Yeah. You share so many great insights in your first book that I had the privilege of definitely reading. I read about 75% of it. I know when it came out, and I was like, man, it was so good for me as a marketing guru, right? Like as I call myself guru. But it was really important for me to learn more about the PR space because marketing has this whole umbrella, right? There's advertising, there's like community, there's PR, there's foundational stuff, which I like to focus on. So there's all these aspects, but learning from you and watching your LinkedIn journey and just like learning your insights on LinkedIn. That's why I keep sharing, like, look, if you're out there and you want to learn some stuff, go follow Melissa like today, right now. So, I really appreciate that because you do come off like you're an expert. You know what you're talking about. You share it very well. You also have your own podcast. You show up in the community. At least I see at least once a week, twice a week, maybe I see you on my feed, which I love because I'm always learning something from you, and that helps me then think about something to share with my audience. And it just goes in this like really beautiful circle.
Yeah.
However, PR is often misunderstood. What are some common myths about public relations that you'd like to debunk?
Yeah, well, first is PR is much more than just media relations, right? What public relations is our strategic communications process of building relationships, mutually beneficial win-win relationships between organizations and the people they should be serving. And I say should be because, right, people aren't perfect and there's bad apples in every industry, but great PR people are advisors. We are strategic communication planners. We do many disciplines under this people first point of view. And that's what really matters to me. That was very important for me to express in Smart Talk, is that, it doesn't matter if you work in tech or architecture, or if you work in, publishing or whatever. If you have a public relations point of view, meaning I'm going to try to do the most good I can in what I do or how I serve or what I offer for people, that's a long-term winning strategy, right? There's a lot of shiny, fast trends that come out in marketing and comms and tech and AI, but people still want people and they want good people. And so that's what I hope to promote in the work. So first myth is we do a lot more than just work with journalists in media relations. It's a sexy part of PR because it's very hard, and it's harder by the day as our newsroom allies are losing jobs and newsrooms are losing opportunities. So a lot of folks who just maybe specialized in media relations, kind of like a doctor could specialize in a certain part of the practice, most public relations professionals have to know just about everything, right? Communication wise. So we may be the guides over social media strategy and management, event planning, certainly crisis communications, reputation management, issues management. We may work with political, lobbying, governmental officials. We may be the messaging, and we're certainly the messaging behind public health. Anything that really matters to society, there should be a PR person at that table and managing it, because they're going to be thinking about not selling something. They're going to be thinking about building relationships for the long term. And that's the biggest myth, is that we're not just spin doctors pushing stuff into the media. We're trying to share a free flow of truthful, factual information across these mediums. And the best ones of us are really the advisors and the truth tellers of today.
Yeah, I love that. Key word here, public relations.
Relationship with the public.
Key word, right? Yeah. I love that so much. Melissa, it's been such a privilege just getting to hang out with you, learn about the processes in which you've taken from your first book onto your second book. I've put your website up a few times, follow you on LinkedIn. Is there any other way we can support you, support your work? Clearly, the second book is out. It's now on Amazon. And I'm assuming they can get it right there on your website, mvw360.com. Is that right?
Yes. So we've got the start. If you want to go deep into PR and how-tos and all my best secrets and nuggets, as my young folks call them. And then, of course, the anthology. And, each chapter is its own story, kind of memoir style insights. But all that really goes back to, look, we always want to know the right way, the perfect path. And what I'm learning more and more, Hussein, is that, success is not a linear road, right? Nothing in our life really is, but we're looking for that answer, or we're ashamed if we got, to where we are this way or that way. It's like, hey, we're all learning. Let's learn together and support each other. So yes, if you know anyone needing public relations or marketing services, I do workshops, consulting, advising. I love supporting emerging authors and just, leaders as well. So I'm so happy to support you, Hussein, and what you're doing, and say, hey, this matters and it's purposeful, and people should take time to work with you.
Thank you so much, Melissa. I appreciate you being on the show today.
Thank you so much. I appreciate your time.